In preparation for our finished coats, we normally apply gesso to the entire surface of the bird. The gesso is put on the bird in colors that approximate the finish colors as nearly as possible to the colors we'll finish with. Gesso provides tooth, or the bond to which our finished coats adhere. These gessos, these new Josanya gessos in a variety of colors, are they're very smooth. It's the first time I ever did it, but I airbrushed the gesso colors onto the bird. You might consider in the application of gesso coats with an airbrush of using a medium head and needle rather than the fine head, although in this particular case I did use the fine head and it passed through the airbrush in very good shape. Let's mix a color now. What we want to do is shade the breast area on this bird in the median value that we see over here. I'll show you how to mix that color so that we might have a usable consistency. Maybe something the consistency of heavy cream. Some people paint with a little bit heavier consistency and a higher pressure. I usually keep my pressure down around 18 or 20 pounds and use a relatively thin paint. I made a mix here of provincial beige and fawn. I added a little bit of varnish to it, and now I'm going to add a substantial amount of flow medium. When I mix paint in jars, and if I'm going to store it, I use flow medium rather than water. If I use water, over time, the bacteria in the water will turn my paint lumpy. It's going to start to grow in there. So if I use this flow medium, it'll keep my paint in good shape for a long, long time. Some of the paints that I'm using are a year old, been stored in these jars for a year. This color, you can see it's just approximately like heavy cream. I'll put a shot of that into the brush. Now, we push down to get air, we pull back to get paint. If I get down close here to work, that's when, starting out, I may be a little bit too tense. So what I'm going to do is back off, and I'm going to give this a shot from a long distance away. I want to shade the point of that breast and just get used to the operation of the airbrush. I let that wash out, blend out to either side over the point of that breast. This will allow you to get rid of the tension, work your way through there. Now I've used up all my paint, so give me a refill and put one additional wash coat over that. I put enough paint in this brush to cover that little hole down in where the needle passes through this brush. That keeps it from drying out inside. I can also dry this area just by pushing down on the trigger and blowing air at it. That'll dry the area before I apply more coats. I just build up the intensity of that color and let it wash out to the sides in all directions. That ought to do it. Now we can clean this up. Again, I take my stiff little brush, dip this in the water, and wipe out any of that color that remains in the reservoir. Clean the tip off, set that aside, and backwash that color out of the brush. rinse, backwash. Rinse and backwash until that water that I blow back out of there is clear. That's all it's going to take. Now what we can do is put in a dark color, and we'll work our way down closer to the bird. Put some dots on the breast. So this dot pattern progresses from large dots down and away from the neck to smaller and smaller dots as we approach the neck. And you can make a dot just as fine and small as what you want to make it. What we do is we intensify this color as we go along. In other words, some of these feathers may be covered over by other feathers, and we want to create a translucent effect. So we're going to have some dots that are on the surface and some that are below the surface peeking through. So we can, again, build on the color and intensify and put this dot, for instance, on the surface. What I want to do here, essentially, is to create a translucent pattern of dots. The translucent effect comes from putting on dots barely visible, covered up, let's say, by the feathers on the surface, establishing a pattern with a gray shade, more or less. You can make dots just as tiny as you want. And then you go back through this pattern and intensify dots here and there on occasion to put them on the surface. We're going to make this dot semi-black so that it would be on the feather that lays on top, not covered over by anything else. Put that right next to one that's beneath another feather, and we can create that translucent effect. And what happens when you apply dots in this manner with the airbrush is that their edges, everything about them, is foggy. So what we'll have to do when we've completed this operation is we'll have to go back through the whole thing again with our sable brushes. We're going to have to split, power up some of these things. What we essentially need to do is to give definition to some of this fog that we're applying. If you wet an area by applying too much paint to it, the paint will start to separate and blow away, so you can just spray air at it, dry it out, and then continue to apply paint, drying it as you go, just by spraying the air at it.